Hi there, and welcome again to Kashmir Exists, the podcast where we learn all about Kashmir Valley. And I'm joined again with my amazing sister, Teyshi. Teyshi, good afternoon, actually, good night where you are.
Yeah, it's a good evening where I am. A little bit blustery weather in the UK, but Austin, thank you for that introduction. And as always, happy to be here.
And happy to be co hosting again. Uh,
Absolutely.
so let's see. Today's topic is on Chilay Kalan, or as it's known in Kashmir, the 40 days or the 40 big. It says here Chila means 40 and
Hmm.
Kalan means big or major. So we've talked quite a bit in the last couple of episodes that I co-hosted about your upbringing, your time in Kashmir growing up. Do you remember the much about these 40 days of harsh winter period when you were in Kashmir?
I don't remember it in the terms of it being 40 days. What I do remember is that it was mostly warm and sunny. But then when the winters did come, in December, etc., in the normal time, then yeah, it was a big deal. The fact that I remember being indoors and less outdoors, the way that my family was, they all had their parents on. They had a ganga, and it was noticeably freezing, and there was lots of snow outside. So I'm grabbing bits of memory from when I was about 3 and 4 there, but I don't think I would have been aware of these words. But I certainly understood that, that we were in the grips of winter. Definitely, I understood that much.
Yeah, and that's so amazing because, like, we talked a little bit about the natural weather patterns of Kashmir and kind of some of the environmental parts of daily life within Kashmir in our last
Mm.
podcast that I was on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm glad that we are kind of zeroing in more on the winter months because as Kashmir Valley is located around the or like in the center area of the Himalayan mountain
Yeah.
range, that's many tall mountains, a lot of snow and snow
Yeah.
activity from those mountains. So kind of explain a little bit more from your perspective. Did a lot of that snow and weather come from the mountain range? Is that where a lot of that weather period would come in from?
Yeah, so I think that because we happen to fall within that mountain range, or at least the foothills of the Himalayas, we're definitely going to be subject to that type of weather that you're seeing there. I would say that the snow isn't coming really from the mountains onto us, like some sort of avalanche or snowdrift or whatever you might call it. It's more the fact that because where we are geographically, that makes us prone to snow in the winter. So we got our own snow, if you like, rather than second-hand snow, I guess you could call it. But it's guaranteed. That snow between December and January, it arrives, it stays for a while. So it's not like long-lasting snow necessarily. You'll have a window of, I don't know, it could be like a few weeks to a month ish. It has his window and then it's gone, but certainly it's guaranteed snowfall. I can't think that there would have ever been a year where we didn't have snow.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to kind of hear more about how it's just like such a common occurrence that every year you just expect it, even if it is sunny most of the year. And
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the Congree earlier and how that was such a normal part of like keeping warm in general. That was a normal part in Kashmir and is, but the what would you say are the common things used or done during that period in the modern day as opposed to like the traditional period of Kashmir?
So let's start with Chilay Kalan. This is the harshest and the coldest period of winter in Kashmir. It lasts 40 days from December 1st to January 31st. So, you know, around December 21st, you usually see this term trending on Kashmiri social media because everyone's getting ready for it. Now, yes, you're right. Historically, and certainly when I was there, growing up in that sort of wintry weather, everyone was known to basically be indoors a bit more, get their really warm, woolly Perrons on, or ferren. Some people call it ferren. I believe that it's, even I've learned that ferren is the correct way of saying it, although we grew up calling it perron. And the kangar, which again I slip into calling it a kangri. That is the Kashmiri word that's been Urduized to stick an I on the end of it. Kangri, it's actually kangar. So even I fall into that sometimes because these are just colloquial terms that are affected by outsiders. But nevertheless, the if you're right, the ferron would have been worn, the kangar would have been lit, the kangar would go. You'd then crouch down, on the low seating. You'd have the kangar there warming you up, and the perron would form a sort of a heat trap. That was for the adults. The children didn't really, wouldn't really be, while they can wear a perron, they wouldn't really be having their own kangar just for safety reasons. So that would have been traditionally, I would have said, up until fairly, I don't know, I feel like the 80s at least, I don't know when exactly it was more common for houses to get heating. So you can see houses in Kashmir now, for a couple of decades now, really, I guess, that not only have air conditioning, but it's a two-way to hot and cold system. So in the summer, right, okay, but it turned into a heater for the winter. So that's a more modern kind of a twist on things, and that's just for convenience. Because I guess with a conga, if you wanted to be more modern and if you wanted things to be more convenient, with a conga you have to have coal, and then you're stoking it, then you're putting more coal in it, you're obviously carrying it around. There is a minimal risk of burns because we're used to dealing with conga. And nevertheless, if you've got some kind of AC unit that doubles up as a heater in the winter, then you might prefer that. Though that's some of the more common things that I've seen. We don't have, and I guess you wouldn't have it, but in the UK we have something like called radiators because we're cold most of the time. And this is hot water that goes around these kind of radiator things that go on your wall, that goes around these radiators through the house and warms the house up. We don't quite have that in Kashmir yet, as far as I'm aware. So I think what they do have is they will have their fireplace, they will have Ganga, and now I know that they do have the sort of electric heaters, which are, I think they sort of blow warm air into the house. So I think that's about as modernized as it's got so far.
That's so like incredible to hear that like so much of the tradition remains, but like there is like changes that have occurred
Yeah.
just as technology changes, as daily life can change.
Mhm.
I see here too that the roads get so blocked due to the heavy snowfall that people have to store their supplies. So is it
Mhm.
kind of, since it's such a common occurrence every single year, do people keep supplies stored for like years at a time, or
Oh,
is it
I don't. Yeah, I mean, they might do if they wanted to. I would say that if you know that there's going to be heavy snowfall, and we have talked before in our previous podcast where you can expect very deep snow. And
Mhm.
so, for the convenience, again, the convenience element, you would probably stockpile things. There will be movement, it's just going to be minimal. Probably every day in normal sort of springs, summer, and autumn or fall, you might have gone to the market, you might, or the local shops, and you may have bought, your regular sort of fresh groceries. S- People were known to buy, chickens from, I guess it's the butcher. I'm not really sure who sells it, but there's like a chicken guy. And you buy the chickens and then you bring them back and then you prepare them. I suppose in the winter that's going to be a little less frequent. People of course do have modern technology there, so they do have things like fridge and freezer. So they can freeze things if they need to. Let's just say they buy a chicken and they decide to freeze that. But you're going to see less movement. I think in reality, in the winter, people cook differently as well, which we see that in a lot of places. So there is something called harissa, which is different to I think it's the Moroccan or something. There's another harissa that is from a different cuisine. So the harissa that I'm talking about, which is from Kashmir Valley, is kind of like a stewed lamb. It's very difficult to describe actually, but it's almost been made into a mush, not quite a mush. It's kind of like a porridge consistency, but it's made out of lamb. And that might sound really weird, and I get that would sound weird. But you know how when you take food and you sort of pulverize it for a baby almost,
Yeah.
it's lamb, but it's had almost had that effect on it. So it gets into this sort of porridgey consistency. It's actually really tasty. My mum used to make it a lot. I really liked it. So in the winter, they like to make food like that. I think maybe, they might get the particular meat that they need. In traditionally they would have got it. Let's just say they got, I don't know, a whole sheep and made use of the cuts from there, made batches and made it last a long time. I'll presume now with everyone having, regular fridge freezers that they get the meat and freeze them, I guess. I suppose they would do that just like us. But eating that sort of food, the harissa, which is made out of lamb, is very specific to the winter time. And thinking about it, Chilay Kalan, it actually means 40, like you said, which means it's 40 days long. So yeah, people really are sort of hunkering down in the warmth and eating foods that give them sustenance and really keep them going through the winter.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear that is such a common thing in Kashmir Valley because here in the States, I live in a state that gets a lot of snow, and so it's very
Mm.
common in the winter months to make warm dishes like stews,
Mm.
casseroles,
Yeah.
those kind of things. So I think it's really amazing that that is such a commonality, not just
Mm.
here or even in England, but also in Kashmir and in so many other
Yeah.
parts that get like
Yeah.
cold or chilly. So,
Yeah. So harissa is a big favorite for Kashmiris in the winter.
yeah, that's incredible. And kind of continuing on that, I know that there are the 40 days, but there's
Mm.
also the small, what's called the small Chile, which is it lasts for 20 days, and that's from February 1st to the 20th. And then there's
Hmm.
also the baby Chile, and that
Yeah.
lasts for about 10 days, and that is February 21st to March
Mm.
2nd. So it's really interesting because it seems like it's almost coincides with winter, like the season of winter.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. That
just
is
with
that
like a
is
few
Kashmiri
weeks
winter.
off. Yeah.
That is Kashmiri winter. So yeah, you're right what you said. The small Chilai is Chilai Khurd and the baby Chilai is Chilai Bacha. Bacha literally means child, baby.
Oh, nice.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting those words are Persian in origin. Well, at least the Chilai bit is because that shows the kind of influence, over the longest period of the Persian kind of culture into Kashmir.
Well, and I also see here too that Central Asia played a part in that cultural like the coming together of the cultures to create even that word and that phrasing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that can be for like another podcast too, but
Mm.
um I think this would be a really amazing time to just kind of dive a little bit more into just briefly like kind of the Persian influence in Kashmir and also the Central Asian influence because there seem to be a lot of influences in Kashmir that are from Persia and from Central Asia.
So basically, I think it's just the route, the trade route. There were also religious sort of missionaries and different people like that. But I think with Kashmir, because it's that valley is very kind of, you know, almost set apart from the rest of the Indian landmass. And so when you had people going from Central Asia and maybe even West Asia, this was quite, the Silk Route, etc. They were quite well known routes for people that wanted to do trade, especially they wanted to do trade in Kashmir, in India in general. What tended to happen is, some of the cultures kind of rubbed off. Some of the people settled, but not predominantly so. So, in other words, in the valley, the average kind of split is that the majority of the people of valley actually shown to have South Asian DNA, including myself. Then the second place, it's Central Asia. Then we have a sort of a little bit of East Asia and West Asia. So you're right, even though, we are talking about Persia and it had an influence, it was quite a long time ago. So if you think about it this way, my mum has about 1% Persian DNA. That you're talking about almost, 800 to 1,000 years ago. That's how long ago it would have been. My dad has a lot of Central Asian DNA, but that's more, that's more closer in time because of the amount of it there as well. But yeah, most of the people in the valley are a mixture of all of those. And it's that unique mixture of the surrounding areas. Because if you look at Kashmir, and I've said it in previous podcasts, it's literally South Asia next to Central Asia. Then you've got East Asia and then you've got West Asia. So it stands to reason that the peoples that gathered there since just before 3000 BCE were going to be a mix of all those people. And yeah, but majority, DNA wise at least, we are majority South Asian. So we're definitely not outsiders, put it that way. Like any region, and especially in India and northern India, northwest India, there is a lot of influence from Persia and places like that. That's not just in Kashmir. That is in even places like Punjab, and you'll see Pakistan. There'll be Pakistanis that have influence from Afghanistan, just like Kashmir Valley does, but also Persia itself. I think it's just more. The reason that it's more kind of noticeable with Kashmiris is because we've retained our language, we've retained our culture. Whereas I would argue that if you look at the surrounding kind of areas to Kashmir, they kind of adapted a little bit more to the different waves of occupation, whereas we really were cut off. I think that's the whole point. When you are living near the mountains like we have done for so long, you are a little bit more cut off, and what you'll find is that people might naturally go there to trade and might even settle there, but invaders are a little less, it's a little less easy for them. That's how we've managed to keep our culture and our language intact. But yeah, that was a really long answer.
No, no, all good. I love learning and I love hearing about the history of Kashmir Valley and like how all of these cultural things came to be through the different influences. And it's so amazing because you're right. I mean, the trade routes were right along the valley and right in that region. So it was just natural for some like all the different sections of Asia to be represented there.
Absolutely.
And to continue on with how the harshness of the Chile winter affects Kashmir Valley, how does it affect from your memory the agriculture? So like the agriculture, the produce,
Yeah.
how things can be grown in the valley.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right about that because, when you look at Kashmir Valley, it's so different from the rest of India and even parts of Pakistan that their landscape is completely different. They're a little bit more arid. They've always been very humid, whereas because we're near the glaciers, we've got a little bit more of that kind of, I don't know, I want to say negative ions coming through, right? And so the snowfall during Chilay Kalan provides essential water for the region's agriculture, in spring and summer, and that melting snow, it actually irrigates fields and maintains river levels. Quite hard to say. um, and that's kind of like a byproduct of that heavy snow. So that snow, although it's very harsh, it's absolutely necessary to the valley and how it sort of, in the spring, etc., summer, how its kind of whole industry that way thrives. So yeah, it's quite. I don't think a lot of people, unless they're involved in agriculture, really think about that sort of thing. I like a lot of us
Right.
don't think about it's. It snows a lot. It's raining a lot. When we realize that that's actually good, our earth needs that. It needs the water. It needs the snow because that's how you get things to grow. Yeah, that's another interesting point about Chile Kalan.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because so the state I live in is an agriculture state here in America. And so I know quite a bit about, when there's arid seasons, when there's not arid seasons, like even living in the city, like I still know that. And so to hear that the snowfall actually helps with irrigation and with water. That's really, really amazing because what it shows is that the natural ecosystem that the valley is surrounded by
Mm.
helps the Kashmiri people be able to grow and to prosper in that land for all these
Mm.
thousands of years because of that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Uh, and to continue on with this other interesting thing that hits really close to home for me, how would the uh, this long winter of extreme harshness, how would it affect the culture and especially the poetry and the writing that comes out of Kashmir Valley?
Well, we spoke about in our last podcast about some folk tales,
Yes.
and a number of them seem to be centered around snow. There's Shinnebrere, which
Mm-hmm.
is, snow cat, or cat from the snow. Shinnebrere, of the cat of the snow. It could be literally translated to, which is about a giant cat that goes around with a big ganger full of hot coals. But if he hears a crying child, he will locate that child and empty the whole cauldron of coals all over him. So it definitely inspired, imagination
Yeah.
of fairy tales. I think there are some there are songs, poems about Chilay Kalan, about the harsh winters and what it's like, um, and just how Kashmiri sort of, there's like a code of practice in the winter where, like I mentioned before, it's you to stay home rather than go out, especially in these more harsh 40 days. But yeah, it does affect. I have, you will be able to find poetry and songs, references to the very harsh winters, because like all, artistic things, whether, it could be writing, it could be singing, it could be poetry, they reflect life itself. So yeah, it definitely does inspire it.
Yeah, and that's I had totally not even thought about the story about the snow cat. I think that's so cool that there are stories that take so much of the cultural elements, put them
Mm,
together imaginatively, and that's a way for the culture to stay alive for all these thousands of years and to be remembered as it is.
mm. Yeah,
And as it was even back then. Um
absolutely.
and we talked a little bit earlier about the survival practices, but
Mm.
if you wanted to go into just a little bit more detail here in our last question here, what would be some of the specific survival practices that you can remember people doing in the time leading up to the Chilay Kalan?
Yeah, so people would kind of stockpile things like wood. So you'd have a room in the house where you would keep your stores. It could be wood, it could be coals, it could be grains, anything that you're gonna stockpile, that most houses will have a room for that type of thing. I remember having that in our house. I remember there was one house that had these items in it, and in fact there was a whole kind of mountain of, I don't know whether it was some kind of grain. I remember sitting on it. So it is quite normal, on an average house to have a kind of like a storeroom for these, stockpiling things to go in. And so, of course, if you're going to have a wood fire, you'd have that. You would have coal for your kangri and other things that you need to get you through the winter months. And that, of course, would include food. But food is going to be in the form of, usually dry food like pulse. So we love to eat kidney beans in the valley. We call it rasma, which is more like a word that they use throughout South Asia. Rasma dal is, it's the way of saying kidney beans. And so we eat a lot of those. So you probably have sacks of those. You probably have sacks of other type of lentils or pulse. I think when now that we've got, like I mentioned, freezers, You probably have people being able to store other things like hark, which I mentioned before, which is collard greens, because you can freeze them. So, yeah, there will be a lot of stockpiling going on, that's for sure. Any essentials that we might need to get us through, anything that means that we don't have to go out in the snow much, right? There
Right.
will be trips, necessary trips, but they will be minimal, and it's usually the man of the house, traditionally and historically, that would have done that. I do remember being in Kashmir once when I was around 7, and it was snowing outside, and of course the snow was really heavy, and there was a knock on the door. It wasn't Shinabred, don't worry, people, it was just a regular man. He was giving out food. Now there's this tradition in there where, if every now and again they do charity, where they will sacrifice, I don't know, like a sheep or a lamb, and then that gets, the butcher then obviously cuts that into portion, um, or they will make some kind of food. Either way, they will then send it out to the neighbors in that region and share the food out. So that's like a religious thing that goes on for Muslims, where and it's also very much practiced in Kashmir, where people share the food. It's a form of charity as well. So I remember that happening
Well,
in
that's
winter.
incredible.
Yeah, I remember that happening in the winter. I remember it really clearly because I'd never, obviously, this is one of my trips back. And so I opened the door, and there's this guy, spoke perfect English, and he was just like, "Tell your mum and dad that this is, such a thing from such a body." I didn't know what the hell was going on, but it was explained to me later that this is something that happens in the valley quite a lot, and it's just part of the tradition of sharing. So when you have good fortune, you share it out, you celebrate by sharing things out, but also you look after the needy as well, and people that need to be fed or clothed, or giving to the poor, etc. So it all falls in that. And that was actually in deep winter. So if you think about it, there must have been a particular reason why it was happening then, and that person had been sent out to brave the snow to give out this form of zakat, which is kind of the charity, whether it was giving money, whether you are just, doing their own version of it, where they share the food out. But yeah, that was, a good way of people sharing food out in these harsh winters, knowing that it eases the burden on people going out and having to get supplies in. But just quickly though, we did mention that we wear a lot of warm clothes. We happen to
Hmm.
have, the pashmina. We also have, the goats that are resident in Ladakh, but when you get the wool from them, it's processed in Kashmir. That's why, things like the traditional wool from those goats is used not just in pashmina, but for example, you could use it to make a perun, and it's a form of being stylish, but also warm as well. So, that's the kind of survival practice. So, believe it or not, wearing a perun is a survival practice.
No, I totally get that because I mean, it really is a way to stay warm. Like it's just like here where we put on warm clothes all the time. So
Yeah.
well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing so much about the Chilay Kalan, and I really hope that we answered so many questions about this really interesting topic because it's so cool to zoom into a specific part of the weather and environment, struggles and just part of life that can happen in Kashmir
Yeah.
Valley, and I hope that we can cover something like that in the future.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed this topic just because I've only really come to know about it in the last decade, because it started surfacing on social media. Because I didn't spend a lot of winters. I probably spent about 5 winters in Kashmir altogether thinking about it, 5 or 6. And so at those ages, I was so young that I don't think it really sunk into my brain about it. Certainly, my parents wouldn't have been sitting at home talking about Chilay Kalan. However, what I did notice in the last 10 years is that it really trends on social media for Kashmiris. It's like a big deal, like they're really getting ready for it, they're bracing themselves for these harsh 40 days. But yeah, it was great to sort of explore that and learn more with you as well. Thanks,
Yeah,
Austin.
it's always great getting to learn more about Kashmir Valley, and it makes me want to visit and excited for the day I'll be able to all the more.
Well, you know what? You definitely should go, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences when you do go.
Yes, I will be sure to do that, inshallah.
Inshallah, indeed.